Well, welcome back, everybody. Let's quickly finish off the book of Joshua here by talking about the second half of the book, which is the division and settlement of the land. God has kept his promise, and he brought the people into the land, and now land inheritances are given to each of the 12 tribes. And here you can see a little bit of a map of where those tribes were and which piece of the land they got. Most of them were west of the Jordan River, which is right here, and there was some territory even to the east of the Jordan River. It went all the way from the north, near the area of Dan, the tribe of Dan, all the way to the south with Judah and Simeon. And here's another map of those land inheritances. Now remember, this land is a place for these people, these tribes, to live out their redemptive purpose. The land provides resources that they can use to serve other people, to bless the nations, and to represent God in the world. So this isn't just, sort of setting up your house and your swimming pool and then just taking it easy. This is about responsibility and using the land and using the gifts and skills and abilities that God has given you to serve his redemptive purpose. Another thing that we see in the division and settlement of the land are certain cities that are given to the tribe of Levi or the Levites. The Levites aren't given sort of one territory, but rather the Levites are given 46 cities. And you can see them here on the map that are distributed throughout the entire land. Now, what's the idea here? Well, the Levites were kind of the religious leaders of the people. They were the priests. They would teach the Torah. They would assist the people in worshiping God. And so the purpose here is that God would put throughout the land these 46 cities because he was taking care of the spiritual life of his people. The Levites would teach the Torah and lead the people in worship. So there was a spiritual purpose for giving the Levites these cities. Then there were cities of refuge that were designated. And you can read about 6 different cities of refuge in the land of Israel. You can see what they are here. 3 of them west of the Jordan and 3 of them east of the Jordan. Now, the idea here is that these cities were designated so that people who had committed a crime, or in particular, who had committed perhaps a murder or an unintentional murder, you say, well, how do you unintentionally murder somebody? Well, today we would call that manslaughter or negligent homicide. And so these cities were designated so that people who had committed a crime of some sort could go to these cities and receive a fair trial. So God here is providing for the justice and the social well-being of his people in the land. Another little interesting story in the division and settlement of the land is that Caleb gets the city of Hebron. Caleb, if you remember, was Joshua's partner as they went and spied the land, and now Caleb is being given his land inheritance. The city of Hebron is right there. And we read about Caleb. He says in Joshua 14, he says, I've served and followed the Lord my God wholeheartedly. And certainly he did. Caleb was one of the faithful people who obeyed God for his entire life. And he says here in Joshua 14, he says, I'm 85 years old, and I'm still as strong today as I was when Moses sent me out 40 years earlier. That's an amazing statement of faithfulness. To be faithful to God, obedient to God for your entire life, 85 years, and finish well, and then to get the reward and the blessing for that obedience. And that's a positive example of Caleb. And finally, in the division and settlement of the land, the city of Shiloh is designated as the place of worship and where the Ark of the Covenant would come to rest. The Ark of the Covenant and the tabernacle was constructed by the people in the book of Exodus, and they took that with them into the land. And of course, the Ark of the Covenant and the tabernacle represent God's presence. The city of Shiloh is right there, right in the middle of the land. And the idea here is that God is saying, I'm going to be present with you in the land. You're going to live in the land, and God says, I'm going to live in the land right in your midst because I want to be with you in relationship. So the book of Joshua ends in this way in chapters 23 and 24, the fourth section of the book. Number one, the Canaanites were not fully expelled. That was a problem. Remember, some of those Canaanites that weren't expelled were the Gibeonites, with whom they made a peace treaty and were allowed to stay. And if you read the book, there were other groups of Canaanites who were not expelled and then would have a negative influence in terms of Baal worship and other negative things that would influence the Israelites. And then we have Joshua's last speeches. He gives two speeches. And in these speeches, he talks about God's sovereignty, God's complete control in keeping his promises. He talks about human accountability, that is, the responsibility to obey. This was the whole theological point of the book of Joshua. Now that God has kept his promise and given the land, you need to obey his covenant. And Joshua warns that if you don't obey God, this gift of the land is actually losable. You can lose God's wonderful gift and the privilege of blessing the nations. Here's just an example of some of those speeches of Joshua. He says, be careful to obey the Torah, the law. Don't associate with these nations. If you turn away from God and if you ally yourselves with these nations, you will perish from this good land. Here he says in chapter 23, if you violate the covenant of the Lord, he will kick you out of the land and you'll lose that gift. In the second speech of Joshua, in chapter 24, Joshua has kind of a covenant renewal ceremony, and he reminds the people of their weakness and inability to serve God. Here in that famous statement in Joshua 24, Joshua lays a choice out before the people. Choose this day who you will serve. And then Joshua famously says, as for me and my household, we're going to serve God. We're going to obey God. And the people agree with Joshua here, and they say, far be it from us, to serve other gods. We're going to obey God too. We're going to keep his covenant. And then Joshua reminds the people, as soon as they say that, you are not able to serve the Lord. You can't keep the Lord because God is holy and he's jealous. And you cannot possibly obey all those laws and all those decrees that were given to you. This is just a reminder from Joshua that human beings are infested with evil and they can't keep the law. They're going to need somebody to come along and transform their hearts and minds so that they can obey God and therefore bless the nations. And obviously, that's the connection to Jesus Christ. He is that one who will come, who will transform people's hearts and minds. It's interesting that the name Joshua in Hebrew is Yeshua, which means Savior. And Yeshua in Greek comes across as Jesus. And so Joshua and this book is kind of a foretaste or a type of what Jesus will do in the future for his people. And that's how the book of Joshua ends.